Maybe you're a recent graduate, or maybe you just took over the worship ministry at your home church, but have no official training. Or maybe you've been leading for a while and you just got your first adult job at a church. Well, I want to share with you some lessons I've learned and that I want to pass on for those who are just getting started. Although I think a lot of this can apply to anyone regardless of age in ministry. I've got 5 pieces of advice for young and old worship leaders coming up. Hey, my name is Luke Jackson and I'm one of the coaches in Worship Ministry School. If you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you get notified when we drop new videos so you don't miss out on great resources to help grow you and grow your ministry. And this video is brought to you by Worship Ministry School. In Worship Ministry School, we help churches all over the globe get results in their ministry, whether that be pastoral clarity and training, or maybe it is recruiting new team members to help run all that new live stream equipment you just acquired, or maybe you need help getting some of these systems implemented in your ministry to begin with. Well, that's exactly what our team does here at Worship Ministry School. For tech directors, for worship leaders, for live stream coordinators, we've got resources for every role. And if you want to learn more about how to get our team's help in your ministry, you can head to worshipministryschool.com to get started today. So I've been a worship leader for some time now and have picked up on some common themes I'm always reiterating to younger leaders who are just getting started. These are simple lessons I've learned from a lot of failure on my own part, actually, and they're also lessons I've learned from countless lunches, coffees, and coaching sessions of my own with people much older and much wiser than myself that I just want to distill down and share with you guys and gals out there getting started in hopes that it will be helpful in your leadership. So let's get into it. The first and most important piece of advice is, above all, pursue your relationship with Christ. You need to hear me when I say this. Your identity in Christ is more important than your job. And if you're confident in this, you will be a confident leader in your role as a worship leader. If you're not confident in this, you'll naturally start to second guess your own strengths, and you'll most likely end up leading out of a place of weakness. After talking to many older and wiser ministry leaders, time and time again, I ask them what they've learned over the years of serving the church, and they just encourage me and exhort me to, above all, pursue and prioritize your relationship with Christ. I was listening to Matt Chandler address a group of pastors recently, and he said, "You cannot be faithful to Jesus if you aren't constantly abiding in him. And you can't abide in Jesus unless you're already believing that what the Bible says about you is true." So here's my encouragement to you today. Get into the Word. Read what it says about God and what it says about you, and then abide in Jesus because he is life and life to the full. And if you are doing those things, you'll be able to remain faithful to his calling on your life and in ministry. Ministry leaders, young and old, I feel like I cannot reiterate this enough. Your identity is found in Jesus, in being a son or daughter of the living God, not in your vocation, whether that be in ministry or otherwise. And if you've ever wondered where burnout comes from, it comes from misaligned identity. Your church job cannot give you your identity the way Christ does. And if you try to let your church be your identity, it will fail you time and time again. You will be disappointed and unfulfilled, I promise. When we lose touch of our affection for Jesus, we are making an idol out of our job. And yes, your idol can be the church in an unhealthy place. A good way to keep somewhat pulse on this is to assess whether you have good rhythms in place in your life. Are you neglecting your own spiritual growth and your family and your friends for the sake of these tasks that keep coming up at work again and again within the church? Do you still have an outlet for your passions or hobbies outside of the church? If the answer to that question is no, we need to do some realignment. I would encourage any young leader to make sure they have a good sense of turning off work when they leave the office or workplace. Turn your phone on Do Not Disturb, shut down email, put those devices away for the evening once you walk in the door to your home. Make sure when you're home, you're actually home and you're not half at work and half at home. When you're eating dinner with your spouse, don't be texting your team or finishing up charting for the weekend or looking for the next best worship song. Stop sending those emails at a dedicated time in the day and actually be present with your family while you're at home as much as you possibly can. Or maybe you're not in that season where you have familial responsibilities. Well, then your job is to have good work-life balance and space after work where you can spend some time decompressing and reflecting on the day. You want to reflect on the day and what it held for you. You want to reflect on what the Lord did in your life and in your conversations and in your mind within the past 24 hours. And if you're curious what maybe my outlet is as I talk about hobbies and outlets, mine's fishing. I like to fly fish, sitting by a pond fishing, just walking by a river or lake is what relaxes and unwinds my mind from any tension or stress I might be experiencing. I'd love to know in the comments your passions or hobbies you use to keep you grounded. So drop a comment below to let me know what you do to unplug. And if you don't know the answer to this question, think about it this way. If you were to go on vacation and you were forced to not do work and to do things that only brought you joy, whether they cost money or not, what would those things be? Maybe it's sitting by a pool. Maybe it's going on an adventure. Maybe it's reading fiction. Maybe you are into skiing or snowboarding. Maybe it's hiking or going for a long walk or bike ride. Maybe it's exercising. Maybe it's setting up the hammock and just sitting with no screen or distraction for some extended period of time. Whatever it might be for you, you need to have something that isn't related to your job that you can do to unplug and do for pure joy. When we neglect the things that bring us pure joy is when work starts to take over and we get overwhelmed and stressed. And let me be clear, I'm not a good fisherman, but it's extremely relaxing and calming to my soul every time I'm by water with a fishing rod in my hand. It's not something that causes me any stress, and it brings me tons of joy whether I do it alone or with friends. So here's number 2. The second piece of advice I would give you is to pursue growing in your musicianship. Be an expert in your music. Practice and become an expert in the parts required and the order of the song. This might be one of the quickest ways to gain rapport with your team. Maybe I'm alone in this, maybe this is a solo experience, but I know I've shown up as a musician on a team and the worship leader is clueless as to how the next hour is going to go. The worship leader is frazzled, they're unprepared, they're unsure of anything else going on except their own part. And a quick disclaimer, I've also been that frazzled, unprepared worship leader before. Total honesty here, I've been that guy. So if you're attentive yourself, you're noticing the bass player hitting wrong notes and the drummer being off tempo and the harmonies are so flat, but your worship leader is just squinting his eyes closed, maybe just really worshiping, but totally unaware of all the mistakes and distractions the team is creating. So here's how you can aim to prevent that as a leader. As a worship leader, you should have a normal rhythm in your week to listen to the songs that you'll be playing multiple times. And you're not only practicing your part, but you're noting and thinking and writing down all the other parts and what sticks out to you. You want to be thinking about what vocal parts are happening and when they happen. Here's a hint. There doesn't need to be 3-part harmony through the whole song. I'm just going to be honest. I think that's too much. My opinion, you can feel free to disagree. What might need to happen and what might need to be adapted from that recording that you just listened to for this week's team? Does the drum groove need to be changed? Do the piano sounds need to be changed? Do you need to adjust a patch? Are you going to follow the exact order of the recorded MP3 or are you going to change it? If you do need to make any of those changes, you need to let your team know beforehand. So let me say it again for the people in the back. Let your team know beforehand. My rhythm is this. I usually plan the set and send a planning center email with updates to the changes we need to make. I send the up-to-date, accurate chart. That's right, I send an accurate chart, as well as any notes I might have made specifically to that week's set. Then I also send a brief text message to the team. I send a group text to that team for the week and politely ask that everyone confirms they've received and seen the notes I've made. This isn't a simple request to ask, confirm, or decline. I want to make sure that people open that email and tell me they've seen the notes that I've added to this week's set. So let's take it a step back though. Let's say you're sitting down and you're really unsure of what you should even be listening for. You're unsure of how to communicate with drummers, or you feel totally lost when it comes to electric guitar tone and how to dial that in a way that fits your team. Well, you need to take a couple steps and begin educating yourself. At Worship Ministry School, we have a great course on electric guitar for worship, as well as a course on keyboard techniques for modern worship players as well. However, if you're yelling at me right now through your screen saying, "How do I get through to my drummer?" I hear you. I understand where you're at, and I've been there before. Here's a couple simple steps that might help you make that journey. Make a Spotify playlist and title it Worship Drum Songs. Then you want to invite your drummer to see that playlist. Add songs you like to that playlist when it comes to groove or style or volume and execution. And as in my experience, drummers don't always connect with terminology or instruction, but they do like a point of reference. They enjoy a reference track, and that's what they're called. When we give somebody a point of reference that we want them to go to, we call that a reference track for listening. And then stay consistent. Don't send them All Sons and Daughters, which is more chill and relaxed and simple percussion tracks, and then also send them major, big, anthemic Jesus culture songs with really complex setups. It just might not be the most helpful reference for them. Stay consistent with the groove and the style that you're going for. If you already have a playlist and you want more, I highly recommend grabbing Drums for Everyone. It's a great book that has a step-by-step guide to equipment, beats, and basics when it comes to terminology and the ways that you can grow in communicating with your drummer. This resource is not meant for you to build the perfect kit. It's meant to give you the right words to connect with the words the drummer is often thinking. Hardware, rhythms, style, all of those are discussed in this book, and it is well worth the investment to lead your team better. I picked the book up for about $12 at a local Barnes & Noble a couple years back, and I bet you could still find it on Amazon. The next thing is you need to show up to rehearsal with a game plan. Make an agenda and then communicate the agenda. Rehearsal is specifically for tightening up problem spots and getting a full run through with your team. It is not for learning parts. Clarity on parts is okay. So let's say the vocalists just want to hit the chorus once together without the band to make sure they're locked into their parts. I think that's great, and it's a good use of your time to make sure that's locked and loaded. But a vocalist shows up and wants you to teach them the harmony part during rehearsal. That's a not so great use of the team's time. So after you've communicated the plan, then you go to execute the plan. Run the set in whatever order you've laid out for your team, specifically talking about the transitions. Almost everyone on a worship team should be able to play their parts adequately, but when it comes to transitions between songs or elements of the service, this is where you need to communicate specifically what you want each member of the team to do. If you don't tell your team, some will busy themselves and play all over the transitions, adding a ton of distraction, while others won't do anything, resulting in a lot of dead space and a discombobulated team that doesn't have the slightest clue what the game plan is for those transitions. So just simply sit down with a piece of paper and make a plan for every moment of the service that your band is on stage and communicate what the plan is for those transitional elements. And the third piece of advice I would give is to have great communication as a leader. The first area that leaders can grow in their communication is with email. For anyone young in ministry, I highly recommend setting a once a day consistent 10 to 15 minute window on your calendar for when you check and respond to emails. Now, if you get more emails than some, go ahead and set longer durations, but make it consistent. Do this every day you're on the clock or in the office for the ministry, because if you neglect responding to emails that require a response, most of the time from your team, you're simply not being professional and you're failing to communicate with the people who are looking to follow you. Your team should know you will respond to them when they have questions. The second area you can grow in your communication is with your texting. Send thank you texts to the team after rehearsals and services. This is such an easy step and such a big win, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. Don't send a group text. I would recommend sending personal texts to each member. A simple thank you and showing of appreciation for what your team brought to the ministry that day can show them that you value them and see the hard work and time that they put into it and all of the sacrifice that they gave to serving that weekend. Often the band doesn't get a thank you. They get a see you next week, and it doesn't really feel like the worship leader appreciates them at all except for on big holiday services. Change that in your ministry, and you will not only begin to retain team members better, but you will also foster a culture of teamwork and hard work. And your team knows that you see them and you recognize the amount of effort they've contributed to the team. The third way that you can win with communication is with phone calls. Now, hear me out. I know you're thinking that I'm a dinosaur when I say that, but beyond being underrated as a ministry tool, phone calls are so highly effective most of the time. They're more efficient and more personal as they build easy rapport with your team members. When you have a question or an update for a select small group of people or an individual, call them. Skip the email, make it more personal. Shoot them a ring on their cellular device. Obviously, if it's a group of people, then that might not be the most efficient way for you to call all of them. Then emailing might be the best option. But getting on the phone with an individual can show real intentionality, real ownership, and assertiveness when it comes to showing you care about how things are communicated to your team. If someone misunderstands you on the phone, it will be much easier to spend time clearing the air on the phone than to attempt to fix it by going back and forth via email for days on end. Let's be honest, we've all been there. And here's a pro tip for phone calls. You can absolutely use kind of calendaring software like Calendly, but it's more realistic just to call people and ask, hey, do you have 10 minutes to chat real quick? I have a couple questions or want to just talk about something specific. Or you can leave them a voicemail and let them know that you called. That really asks permission to set it up. And if you need to set up another time, that'll be part of that conversation. Whether or not you know it, this is actually how people did things in the old days. And the next best way to communicate as a leader is in person. In person is obviously the cream of the crop when it comes to connecting with your team. Being in person shows them you value and care for them in a unique way. It disarms a lot of miscommunication that might happen over email or texting, and it's a way for you to pay attention to the person that you're spending time with. You want to be asking yourself questions like, how do they react when I say this or ask this kind of a question? How do they feel valued, and where am I seeing that in my own leadership? This is such an easy way to show appreciation as well. Bring them or schedule them lunch. Meet for coffee as often as you can. And sometimes for some of the men on my team, we would just go on a walk around the block and chat. And sometimes that brought out a lot of really great conversation in a way that being in a restaurant or being in a coffee shop didn't really have success with. When it comes down to it, show up in both ways. Communicate well in your digital and in your personal communication. It will make all the difference. And the third piece of advice for young worship leaders is to go ahead and smash that like button below. All the successful, aged worship leaders have given me this advice. Luke, smash the like button below. So if you want to be just like them, you're going to need to do the same. Go ahead, take a minute, make yourself wiser. This is the way. Smash it. Anyway, the third piece of advice is to be professional in your dress, in your language, in your social presence, and in your discussions. This one is fairly easy, but I don't care what is in style. Forgive me. Me personally, I think some of the stereotypes of worship leaders are self-inflicting. We all know what I'm talking about. You have a picture of somebody in your mind. People just wear some, frankly, ridiculous things on stages at churches. And I'm not throwing shade, but if you're 20 years old and you're in charge of a team of 40 to 50-year-olds and you show up and you haven't ironed your shirt, or your t-shirt is one of those, like, it's cool to have holes in it, or you're wearing these like sweat pant jogger hybrids and massive sneakers, I just wouldn't anticipate your team trusting you or showing you the respect you feel you deserve anytime soon, unless you at least start to dress the part. And when I say that, I don't mean dress like the guys on the music videos. I'm just saying look the part by Doing the basics. Take a shower before Sunday morning rolls around, wear deodorant, make sure you're wearing clean or relatively clean clothes. Because hear me, if you look like you slept in your car, it may be difficult when you want to go recruit that awesome drummer who works at a financial firm or is a teacher and has to dress a little bit more professionally than you do. I'm not asking you to wear a suit and tie or a dress to the floor kind of length every single week, but I do think there's a balance between sluggish and shaggy and a wardrobe that is poised, simple, and doesn't distract. That's what it ultimately comes down to. I don't want you to distract with your wardrobe because you will have failed the mission just with what you're wearing. And here's one more note, because this is a video about advice to young worship leaders. Hold yourself to a high standard when it comes to what you post and how you interact online. Today, more than ever, we have to really be aware of how we interact with people online. If that means that you need to set some boundaries or barriers to not reactively get into online arguments, maybe that's okay. I have to do that sometimes because I can get easily carried away. And if that means you don't post what you did with your college buddies over the weekend, maybe that's using some wisdom and not such a bad thing. As a young leader, when it comes to your online presence, you need to ask yourself the question, is this edifying the body of Christ or is it distracting from the body of Christ? And is it distracting the body from Christ? That doesn't mean you can't use social tools to lean into your personality and express yourself. It just means you need to recognize that you will be seen and observed by all the people in your church, and you'll be watched by more than you think, and they have a pastoral expectation of you, and it really is your responsibility to steward that position while you're in that role with great care. The last piece of advice I have comes from one of my favorite books for leading your team, The Shepherd Leader by Timothy Whitmer. And the 3 things you can do to sum it all up is really to know your team, to feed your team, and then to lead your team. So what does it mean to get to know your team? Well, you want to know about their lives. You want to get to know really what their Monday through Saturday looks like and get to know the names of their kids, understanding what they do for a living, not just asking, but truly understanding what do you do when you show up to work. Get into conversations about their strengths and their weaknesses. And once you've gotten to know them, then that leads you into the next step, which is to begin to feed your team. Zach Hicks would call this being a theological dietitian. You need to see where your team needs some additional spiritual and emotional nourishment. When you start to know your team, you'll start to see voids in their lives where you can feed them good things. And when you start to spend time asking where they feel like they want to grow, then you can spend time figuring out how to give them those resources. So maybe that means you begin to connect them with a small group that's specific for where they feel like they need to grow in their walk with God. Or maybe you point them toward helpful and challenging reading material for their own growth in their devotional lives. Or you can invite them to serve in maybe a more specific way on your team. And maybe that includes a bit more leadership, a bit more ownership to see them own up to areas that they can grow as a leader. Be the shepherd leading your flock or your team to the pastures that will be filled with nourishment for them to continue to grow as believers. And then lastly, once you've gotten to know your team and you've been able to resource them, then you can begin to really, truly lead them. You're no longer pushing them toward where you want them to go. You're pointing toward the next destination as a ministry, and you're calling them to follow you and come be a part of what God has in store. You need to set the vision clearly and simply, and then communicate the why and communicate it often. So get to know your team, and then start feeding your team, and then lead your team on the mission of the ministry. So there you have it, my 5 pieces of advice for young and old worship leaders. I definitely want to hear your pieces of advice down below in the comments. If you were to give yourself, maybe your 20-year-old self or just your younger self, a piece of advice for surviving and thriving in ministry, drop that comment down below. Let's learn from each other. Let's share kind of what the Lord has taught us over the years as we serve, and maybe it will be encouragement to somebody out there who's just getting started. But we're always pushing out videos to help worship leaders, both young and old, get more organized, use better systems, and implement effective strategies to help help eliminate distractions in their worship ministry. So don't forget to hit subscribe right below this video so you don't miss out on all the additional content coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.